In this episode of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska,
I'll tell you what, I'll bet you that lasagna you're eating that I can call this wolf back.
we'll hear from Karl Monetti as he takes us on a wilderness camping trip of unbroken trails and the surprises along the way. And also,
and I'm sure a sane woman would have said, okay, now you can retreat with your children. But instead, I chased after him.
Rachel Osborn tells us what lengths she'll go to protect her family when her maternal instinct kicks in. This is Chris Zwolinski, one of the executive producers for Dark Winter Nights. Thank you for joining us for Season 11, the Peculiar Proceedings episode. Say that 5 times real fast. Now, in our Dark Winter Nights live shows, we ask folks to put their name in a basket for the chance to tell a story live on stage that night. We've been very lucky with the quality of stories we've gotten from this random drawing. Here's a story from Rachel Osborn, who was introduced by our host Brittany Carnes at the live show February 2026 in Herring Auditorium in Fairbanks. Brittany explains the rules that shape all of our Dark Winter Nights stories.
Are we ready for an audience storyteller? All right. So remember, it has to be true, has to have happened in Alaska, has to have happened to you. Our brave volunteer tonight is Rachel Osborn. I was not gonna put my name in the hat today. And my kids were like, you have to tell the bear story. So it was several years ago. We were down on a trip to Valdez with my in-laws. And we had gotten in pretty late, got up early the next morning. We went out fishing all day. And we got back to our campground, and there on the camper door is a sign. And I was like, that's weird. I go over there, my husband is getting our kids settled. My father-in-law and my husband's cousin came over. We were all just sitting around getting ready to have dinner. And I'm looking at this sign on the door, and I'm like, hey, babe, they said there's a bear that's been coming into camp, but they chased it off, so we're fine. So it's starting to get dark, and we're just sitting around. We had finished dinner, and for those that don't know me, my daughter, Annalyn, is in a walker. She has cerebral palsy. So she was sitting at the end of the picnic table in her walker, and I think it was my son was sitting next to me. I was sitting here, my father-in-law, and my husband, and our cousin. And we're just sitting there, and all of a sudden, Kyla, our cousin, looks up, and she goes, bear! And she jumps up, my father-in-law jumps up, my husband jumps up, my son jumps up. I'm trying to get untangled from the table, and out of the corner of my eye, I see my husband trying to lift our daughter out of her walker, and her braces are catching, and there is a bear right at the end of the picnic table, like 4.5 feet from my daughter and my son. And me, growing up in Alaska, my first thought was not, try to help your husband. I stepped forward and I punched the bear right in the face. And I'm sure my wrestling coach would have been really proud of the right hook and all the weightlifting. So I'm sitting there like nose to nose this bear. He kind of backs up and looks at me. And there was this moment where I could tell he was like, maybe she's got something really good. But then he was like, I don't think I want to mess with her. And he started backing up. And I'm sure a sane woman would have said, okay, now you can retreat with your children. But instead, I chased after him. And I come back to camp after chasing this bear out of the campground, screaming at him and saying, get away, bear, get away. And I was like, let's go, okay? Like, I guess I'm like that little chihuahua that was ready. I had been waiting my whole life for that moment. And I get back to camp, and my husband was just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, did you see, like, you're gonna be on YouTube or something. And the next morning, I show up at the boat, and my mother-in-law is like, so I hear you punched a bear last night. And I was like, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. It was like a cub, okay? Like, it was little. And my father-in-law was like, Rachel, that was a full-grown black bear, and you were almost nose to nose with it. And I was like, well, I mean, it was going after my kids. So I guess don't mess with Alaska women, even if you're a bear.
Rachel Osborn. I wish I was that epic.
Brittany does handle all kinds of epic on our stage at Herring Auditorium in Fairbanks. Rachel Osborn told that story just last month. As I said, we've been very lucky. If you enjoy these true stories from Alaska, please subscribe to our podcast. We also have full recordings of all our past live events on our Dark Winter Nights YouTube library. If you'd like to see Dark Winter Nights in person, our next live event will be in November in Fairbanks. To be the first to know when tickets go on sale, subscribe to our e-newsletter at darkwinternights.com. You can also follow us on both Facebook and Instagram to see details on future events. We're always actively looking for more great Alaskan stories. If you or someone you know has a great true story that you'd like to share with us, you can email us at story@darkwinternights.com or contact us through our website. Our favorite way to receive stories is just a quick and simple audio recording of you telling the story, like recording on your smartphone, and then email it to us. And as you just heard, our story submission rules are: it has to be true, it has to have happened to you, and it has to have happened in Alaska. This is Chris Zwolinski, your host for this episode. One of our favorite storytellers is Karl Monetti, who's actually been in our live show twice. Karl has plenty of stories, and now you're going to hear one that has never been on our stage. To follow along, you could pull up a map of Alaska to see Karl pull and float his way through the wilderness.
I had the opportunity in the late 1970s to fly up into the Kobuk River area, and I was very struck by the country up there. It really looked beautiful, and I had a couple maps along with me, and I realized that, boy, that would be sort of cool going. You could take a boat upstream, up the Ambler River, up the Redstone River, over the top into the Noatak, and float down most of the length of the Noatak. And I'd heard stories about how beautiful that was, and I figured that would be fantastic. Well, when I got home, I took out my big map-E of Alaska and started at the point where I lived, which was on Badger Slough. And I realized I got put into Badger Slough. I could float my canoe down to the Chena, down to the Tanana, down to the Yukon, up the Koyukuk River, up the Alatna River, over Help Me Jack Creek into the Kobuk River, and then down the Kobuk, up the Ambler, up the Redstone, down the Noatak. No problem. Except it was about 1,600 or 1,700 miles long, as my finger could trace it on that map. Probably longer with all the bends and twists of the Koyukuk River. The upstream segment of this was anywhere between 450 and 600 miles, again, because of all those squigglies on the Koyukuk. I couldn't figure out exactly how long it was. But I realized right then it was going to take more than just one summer. And besides, I was working as a veterinarian. Fortunately, my wife was a veterinarian also and could take care of the practice for at least a short time, a couple weeks, by herself. So I decided to find something closer to home that was more realistic for sort of a shakedown cruise. And I found that on the map, more detailed maps of the area where I'm from, around Badger Road, and from Salcha up to the Yukon north, I found that the Salcha River and the Chena River and the Goodpasture River and the Charlie River all began from the same highlands about 100 miles east of the Richardson Highway. And I figured if I went up the Salcha River, I might be able to go over into the Charlie which goes into the Yukon, which floats back down to Circle City. So I could go road to road. There'd be no expensive logistics, and it would be a pretty simple trip of about 280 miles. Nothing to it. Now, I did enlist the use of a friend of mine who had an airplane, and he took me up there, and we sort of scouted out which would be the best route. We did scout out, too, if the Chena would be a better way to get up there. But it turns out the Salcha was a much more direct route. The water was a little bit, there was a little bit more water in the creek, in the Salcha River, at the point where a large creek went up toward or came down from the headwaters of the Charlie River. That creek was Paldo Creek, and we determined that it was sort of a shallow enough grade, and we could see, pretty good water up to within maybe 2 miles of the divide between the two drainages. And then on the other side of the drainage, it was just maybe a half a mile to where one of the upper branches of the Charlie River started, and we could get back in the water again. So that's what I decided to do, is to go up the Salcha, up Paldo Creek, and down the Charlie. So now I had to find someone to go with me. I checked with all my good friends, most of whom were dog mushers, who didn't work in the wintertime because they were dog mushers, and who had to work in the summertime so they didn't have to work in the wintertime. Understand that? Anyway, I finally found a young fellow in his, it was late teens, or maybe he was 20 years old at the time, Johnny Joe Wallace. And he agreed to go with me only on the restriction that if we ever had to carry the boat, I would do all the carrying. So that's what we decided to do, and he agreed to do that. So we began in, I think it was the second week in July. We figured we'd gone for 3 weeks. We each carried a backpack of our own with our personal gear, and then a third backpack that had most of our food, our tent, and cooking utensils, things like that. I had a rifle, we had 3 paddles, and the boat. So to make things a little bit easier, we took the thwarts out of my 20-foot wood canvas freight canoe that had a 20-horse motor on the back, and put my 17-foot Old Town Tripper paddling canoe inside the freight canoe, put the thwarts back in, loaded all our gear in at the Salcha landing, and took off upriver with a third person who would then pilot the boat back. So we got up about, I think it took us 2 days to get up just a little bit above where the North Fork of the Salcha River enters the main fork. That's right around 100 miles, I believe. So we got about 5 miles past that, and then we ran out of water for the motor. And we unloaded everything and sent my other friend back downstream with the freight canoe, and Johnny and I then lined up the river with my paddling boat, and we went about 30 miles upstream in 3 days, just lining the boat from shore, and finally reached Paldo Creek. And when we reached Paldo Creek, we were confronted with a mass of blow-down trees. There were just trees everywhere, crisscrossing the stream, and the brush was so heavy on either side of the stream that we could not line the boat. We actually had to just walk in the stream and guide the boat, him in the front and me in the back, just pushing and pulling, pushing it underneath the blowdowns that were high enough off the water, dragging it over the blowdowns that were in the water, dragging it around the blowdowns that we could drag around if we could, and then making portages where we had to for longer distances. I must tell you first that this Old Town Tripper, made out of ABS plastic, is almost an indestructible boat, and we drug it over rocks and over trees and everything, and it didn't mar the boat at all. Anyway, there were some portages that were long enough that we actually had to carry the boat, and in those cases we would make 2 trips. The first trip, Johnny and I would each carry our backpacks. I would take my rifle, and John would take one of the paddles. We would walk upstream until we found another place where we could put the boat back in the water. Sometimes that might be 100 feet, it might be 200 yards, and in a couple places it was half a mile. And then we would drop everything there and walk back and then pick up the boat and the other two paddles, and John would carry the third backpack. I tried to get John to carry my rifle on the way back on the second trip, but he refused to do so. He had done a lot of solo canoeing and kayaking and had never taken a rifle or a gun of any kind, and he just refused to carry a gun with him. So we left the gun at the end of the first portage, and I'd go back and I'd carry the boat, and sure enough, we'd catch up to our gear and then put the boat back in the water and make our way up the river. So it took us another 3 days, I think, to get the 25 miles upstream on the Paldo Creek, dragging and carrying the boat. And at the end of the third day, we had about a 2-mile push from where there was no longer any water to float the boat, and carried completely over into the Charlie River drainage. Fortunately, at that point, it was above timberline, and there was just low brush with a lot of well-used game trails. They followed those river drainages as well, and it was extremely easy walking, and I think I made that carry of about 2 miles in one push with the boat on my back. I was in a lot better shape then than I am now. Anyway, by the time we got to a campsite about a mile downstream from the top of that divide, we were pretty well done in for the day. And we actually camped at a spot where you could actually straddle the stream. So it was truly the headwaters of the Charlie River. And I had gotten quite a big blister on the back of one of my heels, and we decided that the next day would be a sort of a rest day. When dawn came, Johnny decided, well, he's going to go up in the mountains and look around for caribou. We'd seen quite a bit of game, caribou, a couple bears in the distance, things like that. He wanted to go up in the hills and look for caribou. So I loaned him my binoculars, and he took off after breakfast and said he'd be back for dinner about 5 o'clock. So I lounged around camp all day and just stayed put, nursed my foot, and walked around, made a better campsite for us, and gathered some wood from some firewood for a campfire. And in the afternoon, I went over to across the stream, and I went across to the other bank where the sun was shining on me. And it was about 4 o'clock or so. I'm sitting there in the sun, just enjoying myself. I had my rifle with me. I didn't plan on shooting anything. I just always carried it with me. So I was just sitting there enjoying myself, and I hear a wolf howl from downstream. And I look down there, and about 300 yards away, just walking calmly up the stream bed, was a big blonde wolf. And it got within about 100 yards of me and turned sort of left into a fork that went behind a ridge that was behind our camp. So I'm sitting on one bank of the upper Charlie. The main Charlie River is right down below me. Our camp is on the other side. Right behind that is a little gravel ridge, an esker. On the other side of that was a tiny little rivulet that this wolf turned up. And when he did that, he happened to glance over my way and saw me. I'd been watching him through the scope of my rifle all this time. It was a magnificent animal. And he or she just walked up to the top of the little knoll on his side of the stream and sat down and looked at me for about half an hour. It was a wonderful experience, just being able to see this animal for that much time in a non-stressful situation. Pretty soon he just got up and ambled off upstream and went behind that little rise behind our tent. So I decided to go back over and get a fire going for dinner. And when I did, I looked up on the hill, and here comes Johnny. He's coming down the hill. And by the time he got back, I had supper just about ready. And during the course of the 6 days or 7 days previous to this, we had eaten a lot of our freeze-dried rations, And we had determined that we liked the lasagna the best, and there were 2 of those left in our camp bag. So I figured I'll cook up both the lasagnas for dinner because, John's had a hard day hiking and everything. So I got them started in the pot, and they don't take very long. But John got back about the time I put them on the stove, and he said, man, you should see what I saw. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, I went up to the top of that hill over there. He pointed to the top of this rise. It was, all above timberline, so there was no trees up there at all. He said, I got up there, and I saw some caribou on the far, on a hill on the other side of it. So I laid down in the brush, and I put your binoculars up to my eyes, and I'm looking through the binoculars at these caribou, when all of a sudden my field of view was completely blocked by animals. And I put the binoculars down, and there were 6 caribou that were walking right up my hill, and that were only 20 yards from me, and they passed on either side of me without even knowing I was there. And he said it was only until they passed, and I turned around to look at them, that they got wind of him and sort of scattered real quickly. So he said that was just a wonderful experience to have these animals just within a few feet of him. I said, well, that's fantastic, but did you by any chance hear a wolf howl while you were up there? He says, yeah, I did. I said, well, let me tell you what I saw. So I told him about the wolf, and he was really disappointed that he had missed that. He said, I would much rather have seen that than the caribou. I said, well, John, he only left here 20 minutes ago, and he just was ambling up that creek behind us. I bet I can call him back. He said, oh, you can't do that. He said, he'll never come to you. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll bet you that lasagna you're eating that I can call this wolf back. He says, okay, you're on. So I put down my plate, and I cupped my hands, and I gave out as authentic a howl as I could possibly make. And within seconds, that other wolf howled back at me. I look over at John, and he's eating that lasagna as fast as he possibly could. I never did get my lasagna. But the wolf came back to that spot, sat down and watched us again for a while, and John got to see his wolf. About 5 years later, I made the trip again with another friend of mine, and we didn't have the wolf situation, but we were about 3/4 of the way down the Charlie River on one blustery, cold, rainy day, and it was about early afternoon, and we'd been paddling for quite a while, looking for a good campsite to get out and just start a fire and cook up some tea or something. When we rounded a bend, and there is on the left bank was a cabin that had not been there the first time I'd gone down the river several years before. It looked like sort of a brand new cabin. And standing in front of it was a guy with a dog next to him. And as we got closer, he just stood there motionless. As he got closer, he just sort of, waved us in. And so we decided, well, what the heck, we'll go up and see what this is about, and at least we'll get in out of the rain. The closer we got to him, the more he looked like Charles Manson. When we finally got the boat on the shore and got out and got closer to him, he even looked more like Charles Manson. He was scraggly, unkept beard and hair, black. He was about 5'8" or 9", skinny as a rail, but tough looking. Had a rifle in his hand, in one hand, and the other hand he had 2 dead red squirrels that he was holding by the tails. And I said, hi, my name's Karl, this is Tom, what's your name? And almost as soon as I said it, I almost knew what he was going to tell me. A lot of these river rats name themselves after the river that they're living on. And sure enough, he says, I'm Charlie River Charlie. Okay, so we go in, he invites us into his cabin. Now the cabin, again, like I said, looked like it was pretty new, but it had 2 windows and a door, neither of which had a window or a door in them. And inside the cabin, there was a little bed that he had made out of peeled spruce logs, and some smaller, not twigs, but smaller spruce trees. He had a bunch of grass that he had pulled up from around the house, long wild grass, about 2 foot long, sort of made into a mattress, and he had a ratty-looking sleeping bag sitting on top of that. He had one shelf that I could see in one corner that had about 12 cans of Skol on it, and just inside the door on the right there was sort of a bench, which was sort of like his kitchen area, had a few pots and pans. In the center was a wood, barrel stove with an old tin coffee pot on him, the kind that's got the lid and the spout on it, and usually has a handle and sometimes just a bail. This one had neither, and it didn't even have a top on it. It was just the bare metal pot. And then just to the right of that was a table with 2 benches, one on either side. So he invited us to sit down on the benches, and he started cleaning these 2 squirrels. So the first thing he did was he cut the scalp off of each squirrel. Then he took a knife and cut the top of the skull off of each squirrel. And then he took a spoon, the only spoon I could see in the place, and he spooned out the brains and ate them raw. Then he skinned the rest of the squirrel and threw the whole squirrel in the pot. I threw the skin to his dog. Did the same to the other squirrel and actually offered the brains to us, and neither of us, we both declined. He continued to skin that squirrel and threw the whole thing in, without gutting it or anything, threw it in a stew pot, and went over to put that on the stove. And he said, "Oh, would you guys like some coffee?" And we said, "Sure." So he got down 3 cups, put them on the table. He went over to that coffee pot, which was boiling, obviously boiling, steaming out the top. And he just grabbed it with his left hand and walked over, and he poured 1 cup of coffee, another cup of coffee, another cup of coffee, and then went back and set it down there calmly on the stove. Tom and I looked at each other. Whew. We drank our coffee as fast as we could drink boiling coffee, because we really did need to get warm. And then we took our leave rather hastily before anything else weird happened. And we got back in the boat. Never even turned around to say goodbye once we got in the boat. And neither of us said a word for about half a mile. When Tom turned around to me and said, "Did you see that? Did you see that? He grabbed that boiling pot. Did you see that? He grabbed that pot and he poured. Did you see that?" My friend Tom, not one for understatement.
That was storyteller Karl Monetti using his unique deadpan style to take us on one of his uncommon backcountry journeys. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska, the Peculiar Proceedings episode. It was edited by Robin, with story consultation by Lori Neufeld. Remember, these are the stories we tell up here in Alaska on Dark Winter Nights. This is Chris Zwolinski.